I don't remember what tipped me off first, the way my sister looked at my shoes or the silence that followed my "I'm freelancing" comment. Either way, I knew this dinner was going to bruise. I'm Rachel Lynn. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Maplebridge, Oregon, a town that thinks it's a city just because it has two Whole Foods. I was once a corporate strategist for a Fortune 500 tech firm, but these days I'm something else, something harder to label on a LinkedIn profile, and that unsettles people like my parents. They'd invited me to a small family dinner. That was code for wear something expensive and prepare to feel like a disappointment. The restaurant was called Alder and Ash. New, trendy. The kind of place with minimalist plates and waiters who use words like mouthfeel and infusion. I knew the spot well intimately, actually, but I kept my mouth shut. "Rachel," my mom said the way one might say dust. "You made it." She air-kissed me, no hug. Too much polyester in my coat, maybe. "You look comfortable," added my sister Megan from her seat. She was in a tailored blazer, probably something off a rack that needed a key to unlock. "I am comfortable," I said, smiling, because I knew how much that annoyed her. Dad was already sipping his wine, still doing that internet stuff. "Freelance consulting," I corrected. "Mostly strategy and digital operations." "That's not a real job," Megan's husband Jared muttered into his napkin. Loud enough, of course. They'd all arrived early, ordered drinks, and staked out the power spots around the circular table. I ended up between my cousin Annie, a pharmaceutical sales rep with very loud perfume, and the coat rack. The conversation shifted to mortgages, luxury gyms, summer homes, and something called executive pickleball, which I didn't even know was a thing. I stayed quiet and watched the light glint off Megan's Cartier bracelet. My dad was bragging about how she'd just been promoted to VP of marketing at some startup he couldn't pronounce. "And how's your little business thing going?" Mom asked me suddenly, as if she just remembered I was there. "It's going," I said with a shrug, quietly but steadily. That earned me a barely concealed smirk from Jared and a quick glance exchange between Megan and Mom. And just like that, I was 12 again, sitting at the far end of the holiday table, being told not to talk with my mouth full, while my siblings debated stock tips with our uncles. This time, though, I was different. I'd changed. They just hadn't noticed. Our waiter returned to pour water. His name tag said Caleb, and he looked about 20 with the nervous energy of someone still figuring out whether a customer complaint could get him fired. "Welcome," he said with a professional smile. "Your server tonight will be Thomas, but let me just check if you're the Lynn party." "Yes," my dad said. "Big reservation under James Lynn." Caleb nodded, then looked at me. His eyes flicked puzzled for a second, but said nothing. "Good." We ordered appetizers. They all went for grilled octopus and something involving truffle foam. I picked a salad. Jared said casually, "It's just sad when someone with a full ride to Columbia ends up gigging." I smiled. "You think it's sad? I think it's flexible." Megan snorted. I should have been used to it. The dig's the pity disguised as concern, the constant recalibration of my value based on LinkedIn titles and apartment square footage. And still it stung, because it wasn't always like this. There was a time I sat at this table proudly with titles they respected, a salary that made their eyebrows rise, and a condo in Seattle with a view. But I gave it up on purpose, and they never forgave me for it. That's okay, because I hadn't told them what came next. I sipped my water and let their conversation blend into a blur of IPOs, daycare nannies, and leather interiors. The scent of grilled rosemary and citrus drifted from the kitchen. Caleb passed by again this time, making deliberate eye contact with me. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He knew, but he wouldn't say anything, not yet. Let them talk. Let them think I was poor, because the reveal wasn't a performance, it was a reckoning. And I didn't need to raise my voice to win. Not tonight. By the time the entrees arrived, I was already emotionally full. The table had turned into a competition, and I wasn't even playing. Megan and Jared were talking about their ski trip to Whistler Private Chalet, fully catered as if someone had asked. Dad was lecturing Annie's new boyfriend about index funds, like it was his God-given duty. Mom kept hmming and tisactesking at every mention of inflation like she personally took offense to the economy. And me, I was chewing my lemon-dressed arugula like it was armor. Rachel Megan said, pausing dramatically with her wine glass mid-air, "You should really consider applying to actual companies again. Something with benefits. Dental. You remember what dental is, right?" Annie giggled. I didn't take the bait. "Sure," I said, casually flicking my fork. "If I ever feel like giving up control of my time and ideas again, I'll consider it." Jared gave a mock whistle. Whoa, someone's edgy. It's funny how people think your calm is attitude when they can't measure your success. You see, the last time they saw me, I was living in a studio apartment above a laundromat trying to figure out if oat milk was worth the extra $1. Back then, I was broke financially and emotionally. But what they didn't know was what happened after. It started with a walk, literally. One morning, I walked past a crumbling little restaurant called Cedar Table, tucked in the quieter edge of the historic district. It had chipped window paint, handwritten specials taped to the glass, and a near-empty dining room at noon. But the smell was magic. Roasted garlic, wood smoke, and something citrusy. I remember standing there and thinking, someone in there still cares. I stepped in, ordered a soup, talked to the owner, a frazzled but warm-hearted chef named Lionel, who made more flavor with 5 ingredients than any Michelin place I'd eaten at during my old work trips. He was barely staying afloat. Rent was choking him. Marketing non-existent. Online reviews a mess. So I offered to help. No contracts, no fees, just strategy in exchange for food. Lionel laughed and said, "That's the strangest barter I've ever been offered." But he let me. And slowly, Cedar Table began to change. I helped him rebrand, created a sleek online presence, managed bookings and social ads, connected with a local farm-to-table supply chain, tweaked the menu just enough to attract foodies without alienating the regulars. Business improved, week by week, table by table. One night, 6 months in, Lionel slid a manila envelope across the table and said, "You saved my dream. I want you to own 30% of it. Not negotiable." I cried that night, like Ugly cried into a sourdough roll. That was the first piece. 2 years later, Lionel retired quietly, no fanfare. He sold the rest of his shares to me at a fraction of what the place was worth. He said, "I want this in good hands, not cold ones." I renamed it Alder and Ash, gutted the interior, built a brand from the ground up. Sustainable, intimate, chef-owned in spirit, but modern in identity. We kept Lionel's sourdough. That was non-negotiable. Now I co-own 3 more restaurants across the Pacific Northwest. But this one, Alder and Ash, was my first love, my first proof that failure can lead somewhere warmer. And tonight, my family was eating duck confit on linen napkins under my roof with no idea. I poked at my salad again. It was still underdressed. Note to self, tell Thomas to remind the kitchen next week. You know, Jared said just as the mains were cleared, "It's cute that Rachel's so independent." But success is about assets, real ones. You can't cash in dreams. "Sure you can," I said, meeting his gaze. "Just not with people who only understand stocks." He blinked. Megan rolled her eyes so hard I worried they'd sprain. The waiter, Thomas, this time, returned with dessert menus. My dad waved it away. "No, thank you. We're just here for drinks and conversation." "Well," Thomas said, his eyes flicking toward me, "we'd still like to offer a complimentary dessert for Ms. Lynn. She's very important to us." Megan squinted. "What?" I raised an eyebrow. Thomas cleared his throat, flustered. "Sorry, Caleb told me to say that it's always a pleasure having the owner back." Silence. You know, the kind of silence that hums, that stretches across a table like a fog muffling every breath that happened. "What did you just say?" Dad asked, half standing in his seat. Thomas blinked. "The owner, Ms. Rachel Lynn. This is her restaurant." Every head turned to me. I reached for my water, took a slow sip and smiled faintly. "I figured the salad dressing might give it away," I murmured. Nobody laughed. But Caleb in the background did a very small fist pump. No one said anything for a full 10 seconds, which at a Lynn family gathering is a record. You could practically hear the truffle oil evaporate off the empty appetizer plates. My dad was the first to react, of course. He sat straighter like someone had just offered him a new position at the country club. "Wait! You own this place?" he asked, blinking like the ceiling had suddenly changed colors. I gave a half shrug, the kind that says yes, but I'm not going to dance for you about it. "It's been a few years now," I said. "We reopened under the new brand last spring. You probably saw the local write-up." "I thought that was just a girl with the same name," Mom muttered, frowning deeply. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Because when I was struggling, no one asked," I replied, calmly, softly, like I was reading off a menu. And when I got back on my feet, I wanted to enjoy it before it became a family discussion topic. Annie choked lightly on her sparkling water. Megan's lips pressed into a flat line so sharp you could have used it to slice prosciutto. But Megan tried to argue, "You were living in that shoebox above the laundromat." I nodded. That's where it started. Jared gave an incredulous snort. "No way you went from soup kitchens to owning a place like this. Not without help." I turned my eyes to him, soft and steady. "I helped myself. You should try it sometime." "Okay, that one was a little spicy, but I don't regret it." Caleb reappeared with a slate plate holding 2 perfectly torched creme brulee, a single macaron, and an elegant chocolate drizzle. He placed it in front of me with a knowing smile and said, "Chef sends his regards." Then he leaned slightly closer and whispered, "We've got your playlist going in the kitchen." Everyone's smiling back there. That touched me more than anything else that night. "Thank you, Caleb," I said genuinely. "Tell them I'll stop by after close." He nodded, beaming, and vanished again. My dad finally exhaled. I must say I'm surprised." "That's fair," I said. "You've been operating on an old version of me." "Understandable. I just decided to update myself without sending a newsletter." Megan leaned forward now, her tone shifting, like she just remembered we were blood. "So, do you have investors? Or is this all yours?" "Mostly mine," I replied. "Started small. Took the long way. Learned everything the hard way. Didn't want to owe anyone favors." There was something in her face I couldn't place. Part skepticism, part admiration, part indigestion. "So you're what?" Rich Jared asked with all the subtlety of a jackhammer. "Define rich," I said. "I still use coupons at Trader Joe's. But yes, the business does very well." He leaned back and looked vaguely offended by the word Trader Joe's. I could feel the energy shifting at the table. The same people who'd spent the last hour treating me like a charity case were now recalibrating their tone, their posture, their small talk. It was like watching a room adjust its lighting. Suddenly, Megan was interested in branding. Annie wanted to know how I managed risk. Jared, God help him, asked if we needed legal advisors. I let them talk. I nodded politely, but inside I'd already checked out. Because the truth is, I didn't come to that dinner to impress anyone. I came to make peace with the version of me they chose not to believe in. The one who left the track they built, failed publicly, then built something better in private. And even now, especially now, I didn't owe them anything. I stood up slowly, reaching for my coat. "Where are you going?" Mom asked, the faintest edge of panic in her voice. "I've got some real guests to check on," I said gently, "and a kitchen full of people who've had my back since day one." "Wait," Megan said, grabbing her clutch. "Let's talk more, I mean. We're proud of you, Rach." I paused, looked over my shoulder, and gave her a look that held all the chapters she never bothered to read. "I'm proud of me too," I said, "even when you weren't." And then I left the murmur of confusion and attempted damage control fading behind me like cheap perfume in cold air. Outside, the night was crisp. A light breeze slipped between the buildings, and the sidewalk shimmered with the reflection of streetlights on recent rain. I took a breath, letting the city remind me I was exactly where I needed to be, not above them, just finally beyond them. It's strange what you remember from rock bottom. For me, it wasn't the day I left my job, or the first night I cried into a can of lentil soup because I couldn't afford Seamless anymore. It was the Wednesday I walked through a rainstorm without an umbrella, just my coat soaked through mascara halfway down my face, and past a shuttered cafe called Cedar Table. That name would later mean everything to me, but that day, it was just a half-lit sign and a chalkboard menu flapping in the wind. I stood under the awning and watched the rain drip from the rusted gutter, realizing I had never once in my life felt more alone. Up until then, I'd done everything right. Columbia, Fortune 500 job, promotions on cue, a condo in Seattle with a balcony I rarely stepped onto, performance bonuses, professional headshots, a whole wardrobe of pencil skirts and trauma. But I burned out. Not in a blaze, just in a slow, grinding fade. It wasn't a dramatic exit either. I didn't storm out with a box of desk plants and righteous speeches. I resigned in a quiet little email at 2:14 a.m., hit send, and stared at my reflection in the darkened window until the sun rose. For a while I drifted, stayed on friends' couches, cashed out stock options earlier than I should have, thought I could consult on the side, but most people wanted the firm I used to work for, not me. So I got small, really small. I rented a micro studio with slanted ceilings and a view of a brick wall. The shower and kitchen sink were practically hugging. I sold my car, got a used bike, and learned all the discount produce days at Trader Joe's. I wore the same coat every day for 2 winters and pretended it was minimalist, not survivalist. I said no to every invite that involved a check split more than 12 $99s. And yet in that stillness, something began to wake up. Without the noise of deadlines and meetings and trying to impress people who wouldn't notice if I vanished, I started listening to myself, to what I wanted. It turned out I missed building things, just not for other people. The idea of ownership had always felt distant, like a yacht, something meant for rich men with silver hair and dental veneers. But what if I could build something mine, not huge, just honest? I took an unpaid gig with a local bakery, helped them with their social media, traded copywriting for croissants. I started freelancing real projects this time. Websites, marketing plans, small business coaching. Things grew slowly like moss on the edge of a forest. And then came Cedar Table. Remember that chalkboard menu in the rain? Well, one day I passed it again. Only this time the door was open. The place was dying, but it was open. I walked in. The smell was ridiculous. Fresh garlic roasted squash, hints of cinnamon, and something smoky. Inside, a guy in a grease-stained apron stood behind the counter arguing with a printer. That was Lionel. He had 2 employees, left a fridge that made a sound like a dying walrus, and more heart than any chef I'd ever met. I sat down, ate soup, came back the next day, and the next. Eventually I asked him gently, what if I helped? He blinked. I can't pay you. I'm not asking for money. He gave me a long look. So what are you asking for? Time, freedom, a blank space. I'll help you fix the business, menu, marketing, whatever you need. In return, I learn. He agreed, reluctantly, kindly. I brought in customers through Instagram campaigns, polished the brand, streamlined costs, called in favors from freelance contacts, got the lighting fixed so food photos didn't look like mugshots. In 8 months, business doubled. Lionel offered me a stake. I said no at first. He insisted. And when he decided to retire early, quietly, no big send-off, he sold me the whole place. I renamed it Alder and Ash, not for show, for respect. It wasn't about becoming rich. It was about reclaiming authorship over my life. No longer the girl with the golden resume trying to out-title her coworkers. Just Rachel, waking up to purpose, falling asleep exhausted but full, knowing every plate that left the kitchen was a quiet kind of art. Of course, I didn't tell my family any of this. Not then. Not yet. Let them see what they needed. To see a girl who wore the same shoes twice, who shrugged when they asked about her income, who ordered salad like she couldn't afford the main. Because some truths don't belong in small talk. Some truths wait for the perfect silence. And as I looked around that dinner table, I realized that moment was coming. Soon. The air inside Alder and Ash had shifted. You could feel it. That strange pressurized stillness that settles when people realize the story they've been telling about someone no longer fits. It started with how they looked at me, not with warmth, not quite with envy, but with something tangled and squirming underneath confusion. And something else, fear. Because if I wasn't the poor one anymore, the one they used to measure their progress against, then what did that make them? Megan recovered first. So wait, how many people work for you? She asked, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Depends on the day, I said, keeping my voice soft. Some are part-time. Some rotate across all 4 locations. Jared leaned forward, elbows now firmly on the table, which I'm pretty sure he once called low-class behavior. 4 locations, he repeated. You own 4 restaurants. I gave a tiny nod, sipping my water. Technically, I was a majority stakeholder and 3 in silent partner in 1. But I wasn't going to get into cap tables over creme brulee. Mom was squinting at me now, as if trying to see through my skin to the answers underneath. You always did keep secrets, she muttered. I turned toward her, calm and deliberate. It's not a secret, Mom. I just stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. Annie looked down, and for once her perfume wasn't the loudest thing about her. Dad cleared his throat like he was about to shift into his life lesson voice. Well, this is unexpected, but it's good, really. We always said you had potential. Always sure if by always he meant until I left the job they approved of. It's not potential anymore, I replied gently. It's reality. Caleb reappeared just in time with a second tray coffee for some tea for me and a little handwritten note from the chef that read, Rachel, we ran the special with the squash risotto. Total sellout. Thanks again. Love, M. I folded the note and slipped it into my coat pocket, heart warm. What's that? Megan asked, eyebrows arching. Nothing important, I said. Just a thank you. The table quieted again. This wasn't the kind of family that apologized. Not sincerely. Not without strings. So I didn't wait for one. Instead, I offered them something better. Since you're here, I said slowly, would you like a tour? The back of house, the kitchen, maybe even the rooftop garden. Jared perked up like I'd said stock options. Sure, he said. I mean, if it's not a bother. I stood up. Let's go. We walked through the restaurant, their heels clicking softly behind me. I pointed out the reclaimed wood tables the bar made from an old ferry deck, the art from local painters. None of it was mass-produced. None of it screamed wealth. It just whispered thoughtfulness. Then I opened the door to the kitchen. Warmth, noise, motion, the kind of organized chaos that only happens when people care. Chefs nodded at me. Some smiled. One tossed a wink. They knew me not as some distant boss, but as someone who'd stood elbow to elbow with them scrubbing pans 2 years ago. This is home, I told my family, more than any condo ever was. Mom looked around like she was trying to find something to critique, but couldn't. Megan walked slower than usual. Jared actually seemed impressed. And Dad, he watched in silence for once. When we came back to the table, the check was waiting. Except there was no check. Just a note that read, Family dinner, no charge. Welcome back, owner. Jared stared at it, stunned. They comped the whole meal. No, I said. I did. And I meant it. Not as a power play, but as closure. I think we're going to head out, I said, slipping into my coat. Already, Mom asked, her voice thin. I turned to her and smiled gently, not cruelly. You all came here tonight thinking I was something small, and now you know I'm not. I hope someday that doesn't feel threatening. Then I turned to Megan, softened a little. For what it's worth, I know you've worked hard, too. I just took a different road. She looked like she might say something, but she didn't. Not yet. That's okay. Some truths land slowly. I stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city was humming around me, mellow and familiar. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had anything left to prove. Not to them. Not to myself. Not to anyone. Just Rachel Lynn, daughter of no one's expectations. Owner of her own story. I didn't go straight home that night. Instead, I walked a slow loop through the quiet streets of downtown Maplebridge, past the storefronts with their golden hour lighting and the sound of plates clinking softly behind windows. The air smelled like distant firewood and the tail end of someone's cinnamon latte. It's funny how the world changes shape when you've taken control of your life. Same streets, same buildings. But now they belong to someone who had earned her way back without permission, without applause. I stopped by the alley behind Alder and Ash, where the kitchen crew often slipped out for air. Sure enough, Mateo, our pastry lid, was leaning against the wall sipping ginger tea. You survived, he grinned. Barely, I said, pulling my coat tighter. He offered me his mug. I waved him off and sat on a crate beside him. Did they figure it out? Oh, they figured it out, he chuckled. And did they cry, faint, ask for free dessert? None of the above, but you could smell the emotional combustion. We sat there in silence for a bit, watching the steam drift up from his tea like a ghost slipping into the night. I'm glad you came back here after dinner, Mateo said. You need anything? Just air, I said, and maybe one of those leftover shortbread things tomorrow. He bumped his shoulder into mine. Done. I said goodnight and made my way back to the rooftop garden. Most people didn't know Alder and Ash even had a rooftop. It wasn't part of the restaurant experience, just a quiet space I'd cultivated for the staff. A patch of green above the noise. There were lavender bushes, rows of tomatoes in summer, and 2 wooden benches where I'd sat countless mornings with tea and silence. I climbed the stairs and stepped into the cool air. The city glittered below, and above the stars were doing their quiet cosmic thing. I took a deep breath. There was no applause, no orchestral swell, just the distant hum of traffic, and somewhere below the dishwasher clanging in rhythm. And still it felt like triumph. Because here's the thing. No one tells you when you build your life from the ground up, you get to set the foundation yourself. No one else decides how strong you are. No one else gets to define what counts as success. And no one gets to take it from you, not even family. Back downstairs, my phone buzzed. It was a text. Megan, that was unexpected. Congrats. Really. I'm still processing. Can we talk sometime? Just the 2 of us. I stared at it for a moment, then typed, sure, no pressure. Just let me know when. I didn't know what that meant, if it was an olive branch or just her being polite. But maybe that didn't matter. Sometimes peace doesn't look like a hug. Sometimes it looks like being seen for the first time in a long time. Another message came in, this time from Annie. Annie, okay, wait, are you hiring? That one made me laugh. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I looked up at the sky, let the quiet settle around me, and allowed myself the rarest luxury of all. A moment of stillness, knowing I had nothing left to chase, no one left to convince, not even myself. Just a life growing slowly but surely, like the lavender along the edge of the rooftop, and me finally blooming exactly where I planted myself. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Old habit. You can leave the corporate world, the 6 a.m. stand-ups, and the color-coded calendars, but your body still remembers. I rolled out of bed, pulled on my favorite oversized hoodie, the one with the faded support local everything slogan, and padded into the kitchen. The kettle clicked on. The silence was gentle. No buzzing notifications, no looming deadlines, just me, the sound of water, and the slow stretch of early light curling its fingers through the blinds. I sat with my tea and reread Megan's message. Can we talk sometime? Just the 2 of us. I hadn't replied last night. I'd needed space to feel what I needed to feel first. But now I was ready. I sent a simple response. Come by the garden this evening. No one else will be there. No emojis, no punctuation gymnastics, just openness. It wasn't about reconciliation. Not really. It was about seeing what came next, if anything, now that all the masks had fallen off. The day passed in a soft blur of normalcy. Staff check-ins, supply chain calls, a tasting session with Mateo, where we somehow decided that basil belonged in dessert. I'm still not convinced. Customers floated in and out. The scent of seared fish and burnt sugar danced through the air. Laughter trickled from the back kitchen like music. And at 5:45 p.m., as the city began to cool and the first hints of twilight painted the skyline lavender, I heard soft footsteps on the rooftop stairs. Megan, she looked different. Not physically. She still had that effortlessly polished thing going on, but something in her expression had changed. Less sharp, more raw. Hi, she said, stopping a few feet from the bench. Hey, I replied, gesturing to the seat beside me. Glad you came. She sat, smoothed her skirt like it was armor. I didn't know, she said after a moment, about any of it. I know, I replied. That's why I didn't tell you. That hung between us, fragile but honest. I guess I just always assumed you fell behind, she added, like you gave up. I sipped my tea. That's what it looked like, from your side. From your side? I looked over at her steady. From my side, it looked like I finally stepped off a treadmill going nowhere and started walking in a direction I actually chose. She nodded slowly, eyes on the garden beds. I think I envy that. That surprised me. She continued. Everything. I've built my title, my bonuses, even the house. It's all stuff I thought we were supposed to want. I don't even remember if I ever wanted it. I just didn't want to lose. There it was, the admission. Not of guilt, not of wrongdoing, but of exhaustion. I get it, I said. We were all trained to believe value is a resume, that productivity equals worth. And now you own 4 restaurants, she said, exhaling a short, stunned laugh. It wasn't the plan, I smiled. It was the pivot. We sat in silence for a long while. The city murmured beneath us. A breeze rustled the basil leaves. Finally, Megan reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. I brought this, she said. It's the family photo from last Christmas. You weren't there, but I wanted you to have it anyway. I took it surprised. Inside was a glossy photo, my parents, Megan, and Jared, Annie, even the dog. There was a Rachel-shaped gap at the end of the couch, and I wondered if they'd left that space on purpose. Thanks, I said quietly. That's thoughtful. She shrugged like she wasn't used to doing thoughtful things and didn't quite know how to accept the credit. So, where do we go from here, she asked. I looked out over the rooftops. I don't know, but I'm open to finding out. She nodded. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like we were opponents in some invisible family tournament. Just 2 women trying. Not perfect, but trying. And maybe that was enough. A week later, my dad called, which in Lin family timekeeping is about the equivalent of a comet passing overhead. My father doesn't call. He delegates information through my mother, who filters it through polite disinterest. So when his name popped up on my phone, I thought it was a mistake, or a butt dial, or maybe someone had finally convinced him to learn what texting was. But no, it was him. Rachel, he said after an awkward pause, like he had to practice my name a few times before dialing. Hi, Dad, I replied, waiting. I just wanted to say dinner was enlightening. Now that was a word I never heard him use outside of finance articles. I'm glad you came, I said evenly. I might have misjudged a few things, he added. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get, and it was enough. I misjudged a few things too, I admitted, like how much I thought your approval still mattered. He didn't laugh, but I heard the softest sigh, maybe relief, maybe regret. Well, he said your mother thinks we should take the whole family to your restaurant for your birthday. I blinked. You mean for dinner with all of you? Yes, assuming that's something you'd allow. I almost laughed. Allow. Like I was suddenly the gatekeeper to their culinary redemption arc. I'll think about it, I said, not coldly, but not eagerly either. Because here's what I learned. Validation is delicious, but self-worth. That's the full course meal. I no longer craved their approval like a starving kid at a buffet. I had fed myself something deeper, earned confidence, quiet power, and an identity I didn't need to justify in LinkedIn bullet points. And in that space of enoughness, I could finally choose when to open the door and when to let it stay closed. Later that evening, I stood in the kitchen at Alder and Ash, helping plate the weekend special. Mateo was arguing playfully with Suri over garnish placement, and Marvin from the dish team was telling his usual Friday night jokes that made half the crew groan. The lights were warm, the oven heat comforting. Someone put on a playlist that started with Fleetwood Mac and ended with lofi jazz. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even quiet, but it was mine, all of it. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped outside to the garden where dusk was beginning to tint the sky in smoky purples and golds. My phone buzzed again, a message from Megan. Megan, Jared wants to invest, told him to slow down. I replied, tell him my salad dressing costs more than his watch. A moment later, she sent back, I smiled. Maybe we weren't sisters the way Hallmark movies described, but we were rebuilding something, one awkward brick at a time. And that's the thing about growth, it rarely looks like fireworks or trophies. Sometimes it looks like a garden above a city. Sometimes it sounds like laughter from the kitchen. Sometimes it's just the absence of needing to prove anything at all. So to anyone listening right now, whether you've been underestimated, overlooked, or labeled behind, let them talk. Let them measure. Let them miss the point entirely. Because when the moment comes, and it will come when someone looks up and finally sees who you've become, you won't need a speech. You'll just need to smile and walk forward into your own light. And remember, success isn't loud. It's steady. It's yours. And it's waiting for no one. Good night. Be kind to yourself and let them wonder.